about culture and how we make it work.
Have you ever quietly said to yourself, I'm the problem here, or variations of it, such as, I can't be myself, I can't take risks, or I can't shine too brightly? Well, welcome. I'm Carol Watson and host of Culture REfit, here for a new episode that you do not want to miss. We're going to take you on a journey. You may even be wondering, how do I survive here in that workplace? So not surprising, given that studies show that close to 3/4 of us regularly experience being on guard in our workplace of employment. But that's the wrong question. It shouldn't be, how do I survive? But how can I thrive, says our guest. If you are the first, the few, or the only in a white-dominated workplace and feel like you have twice the pressure and half of the support in your workplace, this conversation is for you. If you have felt frustrated and burned out waiting for senior leadership and those who the workplace was designed for to show benevolence or just some curiosity to evolve the workplace, this conversation is for you. On a mission of changing the world, one conversation at a time. CEO, author, speaker, Annahid Dashtgard is CEO of the leading 20-year-old inclusion company, Anima Leadership, working with thousands of individuals and hundreds of organizations. She's also the founder of the BIPOC Leader Lab and author of 3 best-selling books, including the recent release, Fire and Silence, which we're going to be talking about today. It's a roadmap for BIPOC leaders, a book filling a necessary niche. The insights and roadmap from her work are perfectly timed to begin our season and perfectly aligned with Culture REfit and our community. We're excited to start this journey with such an incredibly funny, strategic, empathic, and forward-thinking thought leader. So join me in welcoming Annahid Dashtgard to the Culture REfit community. I'm so excited for this conversation. I know we can talk about all of these things for many days. So we'll get right into it. So as a guest of Culture Fit, one of the things that we like to ask people to just get us comfortable talking about our own personal culture and our identities is to ask you about how do you describe your own personal cultural identities?
Identifying as somebody who is, identifying as a woman of color and immigrant, those are the words I first used. I use them first because they've been the most defining of my sense of self, and not because I chose them, but because they were placed on me. So I was born in Iran, the hot spot of the world currently. And I came to Canada. Let me just say, the last time the U.S. intervened in Iran forced me to depart my home country. So now I'm watching this kind of the new iteration of intervention. But I moved to Canada when I was around 9, and I had in Iran took for granted that my culture and my racial features were just normal. So it was only, when I immigrated to a very small conservative town in Canada, white dominant, that I realized for the first time that I wasn't I was brown. I wasn't seen as Canadian or North American. And in fact, that wasn't neutral. It was seen as threatening and dangerous and inferior. And those early years and it was a very pivotal age for me, were traumatizing because it wasn't just, getting my name mispronounced, but it was being the social pariah. No one would make eye contact. I was spat on even by kids in the grades younger than myself. And of course, it wasn't just limited to school. It was the broader community. And so I very quickly realized that to be Iranian, to be brown, to be foreign is a liability. And of course, like many immigrants, I tried to be as white as possible, highly educated, hyper articulate, worked really hard. And as as I grew up, as I came into the world and started my career, realizing that no amount of trying to be white was ever going to be white enough. I could kind of be white adjacent, but I was I was and that was really the start of my reckoning with power, with identity. Well, not the start, but I guess doing deeper dives and um, reclaiming my identity, my marginalized aspects of my identity as a source of power. And I'll just finish with saying, I was young. I was age 14 after I immigrated when I remember distinctly being in my grade 9 class and the teacher mispronouncing my name for what was the millionth time and people snickering. And I just remember thinking, I will no longer swallow this. My name is Anna, I said. And I went by Annahid Dashtgard. So if you Google Annahid Dashtgard, it's a very different set of links that come up. I was politically active. I organized campaigns. But when September 11th happened, 9/11, I actually reclaimed Annahid, my full name and the Persian pronunciation of the name, as a way of marking the fact that I was no longer going to try and fit in, that I was going to be in my life and in my leadership on my terms.
Thank you for sharing that. The one of the things that we talk about with the team is how names are so important across different countries and have deep meaning and resonance. Carol is just a Christmas carol. It doesn't really, I don't have any emotional attachment to it. But I know from doing some research around your background that Annahid has some complexity and personal regard culturally. Can you share what that is and anything more about the values of all that?
Yeah. Well, Anahid, it's a ancient Zoroastrian name, so it's used common in Iran as well as Armenia. And she was the goddess of water, night, stars, an earlier version of Aphrodite. Some have said.
The powers of these women that have been erased from our histories, we probably wouldn't be where we are right now globally.
Yeah.
We had not gotten rid of all those female energies and spirits and matriarchs. Okay, thank you for sharing that. So, your journey to where you are now, what are some of the key milestones? There you have such a trilogy now of books to share your background, your story, your experiences. Give us some of the key highlights and moments that have brought you to fire and silence.
Yeah, that's a great question. Uh, like any of us, I mean, there's so many defining moments. I mean, I've mentioned a couple going back to the childhood years, and as a young adult, um, September 11th was a pivotal moment of reclaiming identity, but also leaving the political world and starting the journey inwards. Um, at that point, there was a big gap between my public and my private self. So publicly, I was in the media a lot and traveling and speaking to large audiences, but privately, I was struggling with an eating disorder, with bulimia. Um, just there was so what I was swallowing to do that external facing job was really taking a toll on my physical and mental health. And so I started to do the internal work. Um, I mean, it was a long journey. I don't want to just say it was, but I went to a yoga center in the US in Massachusetts, and I did what was called a spiritual lifestyle program. I came back and I continued to study different psychological modalities. I did my master's degree with various forms of understanding various psychology frameworks, and I've continued in that realm. And the more I did my own inner work, I guess reclaiming wholeness, understanding what was lost in my own childhood experience, growing up as a racialized person, as a racialized woman, the more I reclaimed, the more voice I gained in the external world. But it was different. it came from a different place than prior to 9/11, where it was more grounded, and I wasn't as thrown when people didn't agree with me, and I was more strategic. So it's been I guess, so I was 27, I can't remember, 27-ish when 9/11 happened. So, and I'm in my early 50s now, close to mid 50s. So it's been almost 25 years of reclamation, a journey of ongoing reclamation. And Fire and Silence was, I guess, is the latest. um, Fire and Silence came about when Trump was reelected for the second time, and a part of me, I guess the culmination of those 25 years, a part of me was like, "I cannot believe this man and all that he stands for is being chosen as not just a leader of the US, but on this, global stage, and not on my watch, and I will use my voice in the way I can to make this path easier for people who have a similar identity to myself, who already have it hard and are going to have it harder in the years to come." So Fire and Silence, a roadmap for BIPOC leaders, was my offering in this last 2 years of watching all of what he has dismantled in the US and what he's continuing to do in the world. God, I don't know why I'm having grief come up, but I guess it's in the background.
There's already been quite a lot of loss in your home country. The young girls, it's
Yeah.
the loss of life, of what they could have contributed. The young.
It's an extension of what he's been doing in the US to so many marginalized communities, and now he's just taking it worldwide.
We're going to come back to the book and the juicy insights and strategies in it, because we want to really unpack a bit. But I want to start with workplace culture. We're starting in this first season of Culture Refit, thinking and unpacking, what does it mean to have a workplace culture? And as workers and humans, we were led to believe that if you're smart and you study hard and you do all the things that your family tells you to do, it's about doing the work and you come home and you feel good and you feel productive as a human being. Walk us through your thoughts around the workplace culture. How, in your opinion, how has it evolved and to be where it is, and what's working or not working in a workplace culture?
Yeah. Well, you're describing the myth of meritocracy, this, and I think is at the heart of many, certainly Western cultures. And I see that as really a reflection of the three-part stool of capitalism, colonization, patriarchy, and what I would call sort of white supremacy, resulting in this myth of try hard and the success is given to you. Whereas we know the reality is, in fact, there are huge gaps. For example, like you look at talking about culture, you look at particularly many corporate entities, many service industries where front lines are there's an overrepresentation of certainly racialized and other minoritized folks, but the gap between that front line and the higher levels of leadership is night and day, where still at senior leadership tables across sectors and industries, you're still seeing predominantly white, rich, hetero, normative men sitting in those positions, maybe a couple of white women. And so the Christians, he was able-bodied Christian. Yeah, we can go through the other labels. And I think that was for me coming into my career early on, that was so disillusioning. I did work hard. I did very well academically, and still, in my current role as author of 3 books, with all the expertise I have, I still find that I have to advocate for my expertise and repeat my opinions to have them heard at most tables, because it's not just a gap of representation, it's also just a gap of like whose voices have deserve to be heard. And so our cultures are nowhere near inclusive, even though they are becoming more representative. And that is such an issue, Carol. It's an issue not just for minoritized people in the workplace, but it's an issue for the systems we're part of, for the democracies we're part of. Because if we're not harnessing the collective intelligence from all the people that are part of our society, then we are not going to come up with solutions that are sustainable and and the most kind of, what's the word, reparative over the long term. Um, so I think we're continuing to build our cultures on sand rather than on rock.
Yeah, for sure. So, digging in even more, what are some of the behaviors and actions, particularly from the people that you've worked with in the lab, your experience as an immigrant? The immigrant experience within the workplace has its own level of complexity that people often don't understand, particularly those that are in those experiences. What do you notice? What are some examples of things that you see that are different in the values, in the behaviors, how people experience workplaces, Western workplaces, as immigrants uh, within work?
Yeah, I mean that's a very broad question. You know, when did one immigrate? What country did one immigrate from? Whether one is a racialized immigrant or not. So I'll answer from my own perspective of someone who is racialized. Do you have an accent or not? How much do you embody the physical mannerisms of your home country versus? I mean, there's so many aspects to that. I mean, broadly speaking, I would say if you have an accent and you're racialized and you have different mannerisms, for example, when we immigrated, my father, the Iranian custom is to kiss 3 times, different even than the European custom of twice and hugging that is some cultures. And of course, when he, he learned very quickly not to do that. But in Canadian and North American culture, that's a big no-no, right? Like there's the 3 foot physical distance that you maintain at all times, and slightly louder tone of voice. And I just remember early on after we came, like just it felt like there was a neon sign flashing above our heads, like, you are different, you do not belong because of those mannerisms. And in fact, even now when I go home, I often feel like sitting in the cafe, aware of like the looks of like the white families toward us because our voices are a couple decibels higher. At this point, I'm comfortable with it. Back then, it was like, oh my God, can we just keep ourselves, can we just like make ourselves smaller to fit in? And I think that's the equivalent of what happens in the workplace is that you just learn a lot of certainly more recent immigrants learn to make themselves smaller, try and master the accent, the body postures and ways of to try to be, I call it to be as white adjacent as possible because you can never be fully white, thinking that that's going to, I think there is safety in that, but, and maybe a certain measure of success, but you give up a lot. What we don't often talk about is how much you give up in that process. And I think a lot of people give up their mental, physical health. And over the long term, is that worth it? I don't think so. I look around at a lot of people in the Iranian community and a lot of immigrant communities, and the rates of mental health are stratospheric.
Definitely in the Black American community, I'd seen so much of that, and the burnout. Vacation is not enough to recover because it's way more complex than that. You talked about, and I've never heard this term phrase, but I loved it. The good immigrant. The unwritten rules around that, the shortening of the names, the quieting of the voice. I don't know. To your point, immigrant is a very broad perspective, but from what I've seen, and we have an expert that's coming on in a future episode to talk about the different countries and the communication behaviors, relational differences between countries. But Tell us about where that good immigrant concept came from and give us some context to that phrase.
Well, good immigrant is kind of like being the good woman or, the good, person of color. It's like you got to internalize the norms of the dominant society or dominant group more than they would themselves. So it's like I shared in my own background, have a pronounceable name. You don't want to do anything that's going to impose any discomfort on the dominant group. So you shorten your name, you learn how to speak in white, uh, um, conventional speech. Uh, you learn to talk more quietly. You listen and you nod. I mean, even to this day, the way I am in Iranian culture is different too. And I've done a lot of reclamation of myself, I think, but I still operate differently in white dominant workplace culture than I do in my own family. We're a lot louder and irreverent and goofy. Um, uh, so to listen and nod more than speaking, to speak more quietly, to be glad for the praise that you receive, never to really ask for more, certainly not to raise issues of, you know, of wanting more or ways in which you may have been mistreated, because again, that's imposing yourself. Um,
Yeah,
to you Life is hard, and you should be grateful for half of what other people are getting.
I call it the keep your head down syndrome. I've seen people they work hard, they're told to stay out of trouble, don't make a fuss. You don't want to raise attention. So I've seen people in organizations will keep your head down, and the consequence, as you know, is not good, because in the room where it happens, when they're determining promotions and raises and who's being let go, if you keep your head down, you're not at the social functions, you're not building relationships. People don't know your value because you've kept your head down. But that's right, how we've been raised and socialized to navigate the system. So I'm excited for your book because the keep your head down syndrome is not it's not effective, but we need a replacement. We need another way to navigate so that we are our whole selves.
Now, Carol, it's such an interesting question because I think a lot of immigrants, a lot of racialized folks in the workplace, there's kind of one of two places you can like there's the two extremes you can go around your identity, or at least what I've seen most commonly. And the one extreme is keep your head down, try to be as white passing as possible, and hope that that'll be a path to survival and maybe success. The other extreme is to become so hyper a aware of the one or two aspects of your identity, like being Iranian, being a woman, that is all you can see. And I think that it's important to free ourselves from either side of that spectrum, because to be whole in our humanity means that, like, sometimes, yeah, I want to talk about my racial or gender identities, Carol, and other times I just want to be Annahid, and I just, I don't want to be thinking just about that. I want to be talking about this project that I'm excited about that has nothing to do with my identity. And, so I think it's like, how do I be aware of my identity but carry it lightly, but also do so in a way where I'm not um, ignoring it and trying to deny that it's there, right?
Yes, it already sounds exhausting. And I know it is. I'm tired, which speaks to the resilience and the power.
Yeah, it's true. It can be exhausting, but I've also realized over time, and I read about this in the book, that there is power that comes with that awareness around our identity, and um, the muscles that we have to strengthen because we come from marginalized, oppressed, in many cases, backgrounds. Where, for example, one of the superpowers I have is being able to talk about difference and the importance of inclusion in a way that I look at white faces around a couple boards that I'm on, people are so afraid and have like so fearful, like they're just in freeze mode. Whereas so I've realized that there is a payoff for reclaiming and doing that additional emotional work that pays off in ways that I think we don't always appreciate, in places where.
Yeah. So let's get to the book, starting with the title. Why the title, the two words fire and silence, mixed together, rattled up, important in the mix? How did you come to the title, and what can we look forward to in that book?
Well, the titles for each of my books, Breaking the Ocean and Bones of Belonging, the title always comes first. I don't always know why. For this book, like any good title, it resonates on different levels. On one level, I think they're the twin tools we need uh to change systems of oppression, to change the rules of the game. Sometimes we need our fire, fury, calculated, strategic places that we speak our anger or use our anger, and then other places where we need to learn to let things go or choose silence, not as an acquiescence necessarily, but because we're saving our energy for bigger impact later on. Or silence sometimes can be empathy and compassion, and that's the right tool to or place to or tool to choose in that moment. Um, I also it resonates on a more personal level of in my own healing journey, moving between fire at times and then other times needing to move into silence. So I think and then there may be ways in which other people reading the book interpret it, but I think those.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was excited about having you on because we are totally embracing the fire horse
Right.
Chinese New Year. So the idea of fire is often misunderstood, but the creating energy and using that energy in a powerful way without apology.
Yeah, you love.
It's very powerful. The silence piece is fascinating to me because I practice Buddhism and meditation and hot yoga, and the power that you talk about is very much about being silent and quieting the mind and really re-energizing in a different way by being quiet. And also how it's a form of resistance. It's a actual action to be still, to be silent, to really still the mind. Because the bias and the response mechanism of the brain will say fight or flight. And when I tell people, the first thing you need to do is just do a deep breath, and probably a few of them, because the brain needs time to quiet down to really understand and think clearly versus just reacting. So it's that silence of, let me be strategic, let me take an action to see what this dynamic is, see what the more strategic move is, which is what I love about your book, is that it teaches people to be much more strategic. I talk about, it's a chess game. The worm place is very much.
Yeah, at the heart of a lot of this book is you talk about it as taking the deep breath. The word I think about is our ability to discern. And at a certain moment in the book I reference, and you're reminding me, I think there's a similar figure in Buddhism, but the figure of justice with the scales in one hand or the empty bowl in some Buddhist figures,
Yeah.
and then the sword in the other. And the job of the warrior or the person working for justice is in that deep breath in that moment to discern again, yeah, do I hold space in this moment? Like hold silence, hold empathy, or do I pick up the sword and advocate and speak? And I think that choice, that that is the chess game, and we can't just be driven by our impulses or emotions, and nor should we be swallowing the rules of the external systems of oppression either. Like, we have to be able to, whatever word or action I choose in this moment, I need to be able to choose to the best of my ability. And I think if more of us did that, Carol, we'd have a lot more impact.
I totally agree. So, I wanted to talk about how workplace cultures vary across borders and regions. This is a global community. There are people that may be from the West and are moving in other places and vice versa. And as a global citizen, someone who has lived and done work and had experiences and work with clients around the world, what have you noticed about workplace cultures across borders?
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, certainly there are global cultural norms. I mentioned earlier the impacts of global systems like um, capitalism and white supremacy and patriarchy means that across the world, if you are white or lighter skinned, or you're a male, or you come from a Western culture, you're always going to be higher on the pecking order, or all of those, especially if you have all of those attributes, and that is universally true, pretty much. And then there are, of course, cultural, regional differences. For example, Canadian culture is similar to British culture because, of course, we're a former British colony, as the U.S. used to be. Um, and we are, British culture is defined by being very, quiet and polite and emotionally unspoken. And those cultural attributes play out to a large extent here in Canada as well. People here tend to be polite and underspoken. But it's fascinating because we're also influenced by the US culture. And so uh, there is more emotional, I would say, more room to talk about emotions in Canada than there is in British culture. So it's it's fascinating, right? Like, what to really look at culture um, from the outside in, and to think about, yeah, how is my my country's culture, my sector's culture, my individual workplace culture been shaped by those macro forces, by the broader regional and country forces, and then what are even sectors have different cultures, right? Healthcare has a different culture and speak than does law. The general thing about culture is, generally speaking, it's helpful to know the insider culture as an outsider coming in, but also not to feel so imprisoned by that, because I think it's like we're talking about as an immigrant. One of the things we bring as outsiders is the ability to bring in new ways of thinking and doing that people inside would not, because we get caught up in groupthink. And so if I come in as an outsider, and I'm like, as a, into the legal sector, and I'm just trying to, do things by the book, I'm losing what's most valuable in a way to bring in.
So let's dig into the book a little bit more. In the book, there are amazing quotes and experiences, and you walk people through the pain and why there have been some challenges, but also as part of culture refit, we want to be part of the solutions, part of the strategy, part of the tips. Can you walk us through the narrative of Fire and Silence, and what you hope to take us through as a journey?
Yeah, I'd love to. So it really is meant as a roadmap. And I took a lot of sections out to boil it down to what I think are the four kind of key stages of leadership development. And so it really is a book that would speak to someone, I think, early, just coming into the workforce, as well as somebody mid, later career, because we're all at one stage or another, and often we cycle through. The first part of the book is called Survive, and it's about naming and identifying workplace racism, the patterns that play out. We can't change what we can't name. So there's 5 chapters, and it sort of takes, talking about imposter syndrome and whiteness, cultural norms, and what are the patterns that play out for people of color. And then the second section is, how do we then navigate? The second section is called impact, how to have influence. And again, 5 chapters talking about for example, how do we influence versus just speak? Um, the importance of finding our purpose, and how do we get to that? And are we in the right role to fulfill our purpose? And how do we answer that? And then the third section moves more deeply into, and I think is in many ways, it was the hardest section to write. And I think one that we don't often find in leadership books. But for those reasons, I think it's the most vital. And it's called Heal, and the importance of reclaiming our own wholeness. And it deals with um, naming and identifying racial trauma, understanding our triggers, befriending our emotions and working with our emotions as a form of intelligence, and how to navigate the backlash, often as leaders of color, as the first, the few, or the only in our workplaces. How do we, being stuck between the rock of the white leadership above us, that often there's barriers, and then the hard place of being often targeted by members of our own community, and how hard that can be. And I think that is the most important section in a lot of ways, because I think if we getting to the final section of the book, which is called Thrive, learning to use power well, changing the rules of the game. If we really want to change systems of oppression, change the way power is used to extract and to uh, uh, one way, and to reinforce hierarchy, and to treat people as inferior, whatever group it might be, if we want to change the way that happens, we actually have to do our inner work first. That is actually impossible to use power differently if we haven't done our internal healing about our own the woundings of power that were done to us. And it's the hardest to do. It's a lot easier.
And then there are many levels, right? So there's many levels. Yep. This book is, tell me about the target audience and who- how you, what patterns you see across the different ethnicities and races and nationalities, and what are the similarities of this target audience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, listen, one thing I want to say is that, and I say this at the beginning in the introduction. Of course, as I recognize, and there's huge differences in the histories of somebody who's indigenous to North America, and there's differences in what indigenous nation you come from, and the way land was stolen and taken away, and the ignored treaties, versus somebody who is Black identifying. And again, whether you're connected to the slave trade or whether you've come over as a more recent immigrant, there's differences in the Black diaspora stories. And again, if someone is East Asian and has a connection to the railroad, or Japanese internment, or again, more recent, versus Middle Eastern. So there's huge differences in the histories. And in some ways, um, well, in many ways, racialization, and I use that term to mean the ways in which different racial minority groups are socialized and the pressures put on, there's differences. And whether you're model minority or whether you're Black, so there's lots of nuance. However, this book is really written for a very broad demographic of people who are in the workplace, and kind of know that it doesn't feel as comfortable as their white counterparts, that maybe things feel a little bit more challenging, or are in a position of leadership already and are feeling upset and frustrated because, again, I'm now recognizing these gaps. Um, and maybe I'm heading towards burnout because I'm working really hard. I'm working twice as hard, and I don't know how to. And really, the book is meant to just validate your. Here's what the patterns are, and they happen for racialized people across all these different categories. And there are ways to navigate through that without having to sacrifice all of who you are in the process. I mean, that's the biggest thing I was seeing in the BIPOC Leader Lab. I've been running that for 5 years, and I've been working for racialized leaders, BIPOC leaders for much, much longer, is I see so many people trying to over-credentialize, have a hard time setting boundaries, are so upset and angry, and it's taking a toll on their physical and mental health, and are just feeling like this is me, or this is happening to a small group of myself and my peers, or my own racialized group. One of the things I wanted to do with this book is say, fuck, this isn't just one group. It's all of us that are non-white. And beyond that, there's parallels to anyone that occupies a minoritized identity, because it's about how power works at a certain level. And we don't have to swallow this. We can learn to navigate it.
The over credentializing has been fascinating to me because it is rooted in so many things all over the world. And so whether I've known young people, and people entering into the industry will go to school to get their master's, because even though it's not needed in a particular industry, because it's the messaging that they've been told, even if they were born in the U.S. That I know, for example, my Nigerian friends, education is drilled with many countries.
And that is a survival mechanism in a lot of non-white countries to get by in white society, because it's recognized as, I mean, my brother-in-law is Nigerian and was British boarding schools and British universities, and it was all about, and guess what? He is no longer in the workforce, because by the time best education and British boarding school culture, and yet when he reached the workplace, the racism was such that he struggled all along. He left his job as a lawyer and is still looking for work. I understand it, and it's also just not enough.
Often the families are reinforcing that need and expectation. And often the families say, this is what you need to do in order for us to be proud of your development. And it becomes this another deep subconscious internal battle, leading to the physical, disruption that we can't reconcile. Well, we're doing what our parents told us to do, but it's not working, so it must be me. And I love that in your book, one of the big purposes is to make sure people know it's not you. You are not the problem.
Yeah, it's like that hypervigilance gets translated into perfectionism, and
Mhm.
I'm going to work twice as hard for half the success, and I don't understand why it's not enough. And it is it is a huge source of stress for many people across many different non-white diasporas.
I saw a social media post earlier. uh, There's some amazing ones about workplace culture. And the person was explaining the difference between a slacker in corporate America and a high performer. And she said, well, the slacker is much more comfortable to the organization because they're not going to ask questions. They're not going to make any noise. They're not going to do the thing. So the slacker is annoyed by the high achiever, and the high achiever is annoyed by the slacker, but the organization is much more comfortable. The desire to have peace is much more important to the organization. So the slacker will often be the one that stays in the organization versus the high performer that's going to ask questions. They're going to be the disruptor. They're going to um, say, why is this the case? Why does that happen? And often that comes from the over credentialing, and that brilliance that often people will to creation.
It's at some point, I talk about the different coping patterns that many racialized folks adopt, and sometimes more than one, and how we get caught up in the coping mechanism as our identity, and it's a different prison than to just be locked into. So the angry activist, the hyper intellectual, these are just, I mean, I explain them.
Well, give us an example of one of your favorites.
Um,
How does it show up?
well, I'll just the lone wolf, the perfectionist, the perpetual victim, the Oreo cookie, someone who's passive aggressive, Pollyanna, everything is good, good, good all the time, the risk avoider, the silent competitor. What's my I mean, I can identify with a number of these. Angry activist for many years, where just always had to speak up at any opportunity and was comfortable being put into the outsider role until I realized at a certain point that, oh my gosh, I'm just reenacting my childhood over and over in any context I'm in by putting myself in the outsider status. And then I lose access to having influence. It's not strategic, it's hurtful to me, and it lessens my impact. So I identify with that. The lone wolf. Um, Still, it's hard for me to ask for help or to build um, a sense of community. I often fall into, I just got to do this on my own because it's easier for me to do that. The perfectionist absolutely took a long time to, and I'm still also unlearning this, that it's okay for me to make mistakes. It's okay for me to be at a board table with mostly white folks and say something that may not be perfectly packaged, and to take my time saying it. And if it doesn't, and to circle back and repeat myself if I choose to. Like, I do not have to be perfect the first time because, excuse me, like, you look at these ineffectual, like, look at Trump. If there's anything that Trump has given us, it's permission for the rest of us that work so freaking hard to be
There are many on his team that will make you feel probably more frustrated because we know better.
Yeah, right? Like, if the president can be such, excuse me, a complete idiot, then certainly I can make a few mistakes. God damn.
Yeah, I'm going through, there's a great program around positive intelligence, and they talk about the saboteur. I call it the gremlin, and it's very much our own self-judging, our judging of others and judging of circumstances. And I think that's where imposter syndrome comes from, but that judging, whether it's to ourselves, that we beat ourselves up to be that person, or judging other people or the circumstances, really eats at our ability to be our best selves. Yeah. So being able to name those things and, have a laugh at it. And we'll find some joy in really seeing and hearing how we're showing up, our human selves. We're just human. But, getting a laugh out of being able to name when we're hyper vigilant or we're, in a victim mode helps kind of soften it, and give yourself a hug afterwards. That's what. So tell us about the lab and what you've learned on the other side that has informed the book. Where are some of you know, the journeys that you've been able to take people?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's I mean, there's many moments that stand out. Um, I mean, there's such power in being able to shorthand with a group of people that have similar experiences to yourself. Uh, there's a couple moments that stand out. Like, I'm just that uh one woman who really a doctor, was really struggling around boundaries. Well, was often staying later than she wished to, was basically in a pattern of over committing her time because she said yes to too many people, like, really just wanted to be not just a good care provider, doctor, but was also a team, like, had her team. So was, team people were coming to talk to her. And this is what happens, I think, also for a lot of racialized leaders. You also become the listening ear and support person for staff that have nowhere else to go. So you're double dutying a lot of the time. And then also pressures from the admin, white folks above, and just on all ends. And so one of the key takeaways for her was really, well, what boundaries would most serve you? What's getting in the way of you asking for that? And what's a place that you could start? And you could, and recognizing you're going to feel uncomfortable. This is going to be, because for many of us, we're unlearning you talked about the internal saboteur. I think we internalize white culture norms, or we internalize the norms of dominant culture because that's what it means to feel safe. And it's the hardest part to unlearn because I got to learn that it's okay for me not to be hypervigilant all the time. That's really right. So for her, it was, what are the baby steps I can take, like where I can feel uncomfortable? I'm not pushing myself into a threat response. I can, and it was really rewarding because she was, started with email and I can't stay after work this late and but it starting to learn that it was okay for her to say no and that she wasn't going to that it was not, she wasn't going to set the world on fire. And in fact, she was going to be more effective in her job because she would have more energy. Right. And so flipping the frame from I have to give all of myself to these uh, systems to these systems that are going to extract everything from me if I let them because they're set up that way, to I am my most valuable resource.
A trending topic a few years ago, psychological safety. And so there was a period where organizations wanted to really make sure that there was a place and a safety that people can be their best selves and be honest and really share who they were, give feedback. The intersection of the dominant culture and creating psychological safety and the marginalized groups that we're talking about is a different level of psychological safety. And so when I think about the person with boundaries and the hypervigilance and taking agency, which you talk about, which I totally believe we have a lot more power than we realize to do the thing, depends on psychological safety, which I translate into trust. But you have to feel like you can trust the system, trust your boss. Most people will leave an organization because of their manager versus the bigger systems. So how do you think about psychological safety with this target audience, with this group, and how does that differ from the psychological safety that's been talked about and trending in great workplaces?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's kind of like the conversation around vulnerability in a way, right? Brene Brown kind of made it the big trendy term. And it does mean something different, like you're saying, for a minoritized staff person or leader. I talk about this as well in the book about how important modeling vulnerability is, psychological safety. But I give a big caveat, and I say instead of it, for many minoritized leaders or people, it's not vulnerability all the time with all groups. It's about strategic vulnerability, that we still need to be able to be real enough because there's a basic human language, a code across cultures and across human history that we can feel on a nervous system level when somebody's being real versus when they're not. And yeah. And
Feel it
so
over your body.
as a racialized woman, I don't want to be in a role where I'm always performing or having to kind of be separate from my authentic self. But I am going to make more strategic choices about how real I'm going to get with who and in what situations. And so, again, coming back to that word about discernment becomes really important. And the second thing I'll say about that is I think when we're in positions of influence, we have a responsibility to create that environment for others, right? So you talked about, I got to feel a certain level of trust in my boss. Well, yes, but if I am the boss, I also have responsibility to model that in a safe way for everybody on my team because I'm creating the environment for them.
Much more of an important responsibility. Okay, give me a second.
Yeah. Yeah. It's harder to be in power. I mean, I know you know this too, Carol. Like, it's easier to be, in a way, right, pushing against power. But when we start to get into positions of influence, where we have a team of 30 or 100 or maybe sometimes more than that, it's harder. And for many folks of color, it's, gosh, I'm the only one. I'm one of a handful. It's even harder. So the strategy piece is really key, and finding our people so we're not doing it alone.
So, winding down a little bit, one of the things that I love to ask our guests, because it's culture refit, so we should, is as a global citizen and a passionate student observer and thought leader around culture, what are you curious about right now when it comes to culture?
I think we need to develop power literacy in our workplace cultures and
Mm.
get comfortable addressing differences in power and influence, and get more comfortable with those conversations. One form of that is like get more comfortable talking about issues of race and ethnicity and gender, but there's other aspects too. And especially it becomes even more important when we have more diverse workplace teams, global teams. If we can't talk about those differences that are often connected to more or less power, then we're held up by them.
Power in a patriarchal system sends triggers of all kinds of thing with leaders. They're like, wait, power?
Yeah.
Y-
Yeah.
Power?
Exactly.
How do you talk about power to leaders with the tension of patriarchy and toxic capitalism?
Well, a colleague of mine, Julie Diamond, she's done a lot of great work around power. Her book, Power: A User's Guide, is one I'd recommend, and has also developed an assessment around a leader's use of power, different dimensions of measurement. And um, I've learned a lot, including, the how power is multifaceted, and how a leader's job in any moment is to do an up-to-date snapshot of how power is constellated in this particular group, in this room, in this organization. Because of course, there's global patterns, which we talked about around race and gender and class background and all of that. There's also then other forms of power connected to personality traits and how long you've been in an organization, and even your physical presence, how tall you are, how beautiful. And so power it's always present. It's like oxygen. And if we can be aware of it, we can use it well. Whereas if we're not aware of it, we use it in unhealthy and often destructive ways. So I think that there's really fascinating conversations to be had around understanding power, if different forms it takes, and then, as I said, how to use it well, especially if you're in leadership.
We are adding that to the reading list, culture refit fans. So, our final question, we call them Dicas, which is Portuguese for tips. And we always want to collect great tips, and your book is filled with so many tips. But what is one tip, your favorite one to recommend to audiences, or maybe a favorite one in the book for you that you want to share?
You know, I think the most important thing that I do is, and I share with others, is ask myself, what's your come from place? And what I mean by that is, am I coming from a place of trauma and quick reactivity, which often does not go well, even when I'm responding by email and I think that I'm like being really diplomatic. If I'm coming from a place of like instant anger, it's going to be felt. It's not going to help the situation. Whereas if I can you called it the deep breath, the pause, the checking in with myself, I often do a quick, how are you feeling? What do you need to do right now? And are you ready? Are you in the right place? Are you grounded enough to respond? And when I respond from a more centered and grounded place, it makes it's like it makes all the difference. I can then have an impact. I'm often heard on the other side. I can hold my ground. Whereas when the instant trauma, often first response is a trauma response, doesn't tend to go so well. So what part of yourself are you acting from?
I love that. I'm learning more about the physical things that we need to do before we go into a meeting, before we enter into stress. So really getting connected to our body, our mind, and spirit is very much a people of culture, people of color, cultural component. We've been indoctrinated into a place where we lose our connection to spirit and our physical piece. So I love that we're, you're thinking about what is our physicalness and how are we showing up, and take a moment to think about our wholeness, which you talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so well articulated.
So thank you so much for joining us. There are so many great nuggets. Please, I hope this was a great experience for you. And thank you for joining the Culture REfit community.
Oh, it has been my pleasure to speak with you today, Carol. Thank you for creating this space.
So we just finished an amazing conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please follow us on Instagram at CultureFit. Don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel. Listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcast. And remember to visit culturerefit.com to see more information about each episode, our amazing guests and team, and all of the inside information that you may not hear on the episode. Send your questions, your ideas, your comments, and suggestions for who you'd like us to cover and what you want us to talk about. Thank you for joining.